connect with Facebook. So this is going to be streamed on our Facebook page for everybody on Facebook. So you can access to it afterwards. And if you want, you can even download it and use it if you want, if there is anything that you can use for your personal brand or whatever, or for your company, you can use it as well.
Okay, perfect.
If you need anything with that, like any raw file or something, let me know and I can give you the file. I can send you afterwards the link.
Sounds good.
Cool. 1 second. See if we're already live.
And I'll be able to share my screen, I assume, of course, and all that.
Yes. Yeah, we are live already. So, hello, Jose. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Hello, Lucas. How are you?
Yes. Very good, very good. Welcome to XPRESS Masterclasses, this new format of masterclasses that we have at Inside Academy due to the whole situation. And we are very happy to receive you again. You already did a masterclass in Inside Academy, but a face-to-face one, right?
Yeah, it was face-to-face. I think that was over 2 years ago. So yeah, but thank you for having me back.
Was it in the event, or was it a masterclass like by yourself, or was it in the event of entrepreneurs that you also presented with other?
It was an evening event, and there were 2 other presenters. So,
yeah, remember Colombian entrepreneurs, right? I think Si Se Puede.
No, I think it was I think it was just a wider sort of like presentation, because I know Ayman Hamdouna was there and Lucho was there as well. Lucho Palevsky was presenting, and I don't remember exactly what the topic or the general theme was, but yeah, it was an evening presentation.
That was probably one of our first events, like almost 3 years ago, right?
And you guys took 2.5 years to invite me again. So.
No, come on. But weren't you part of the boarding consultants for the sustainability?
Yes,
course?
I did. I participated in one of those. I think it was a few months ago that when you guys were organizing some of the material for this year's program, which of course has all been sent into massive disarray. But yeah, when you were planning the sustainability modules of all the education that you do.
Yeah. Well, we still have that in plan. In fact, it's about to be that. Well, I don't know exactly the date, and I don't know if I can disclose it, but we are launching that program hopefully this year as soon as possible. So
sounds good. It sounded really interesting. So I was happy to be part of that.
You'll hear about it soon, hopefully.
I'm sure I will.
Well, everybody, here I am with Jose Mantilla. He's the founder of Movendo and Motu Science, 2 startups. Well, startups, are they in the category of startups? Or?
Movendo is a consulting business. So it's a traditional consulting, strategic consulting in the engineering field, and Motu Science is a technology company. So even though I don't consider myself an entrepreneur because of I was trained as a scientist, so that's not how I see myself. I guess it is a startup, and I guess I'm an entrepreneur now.
Yeah, well, you're both things. You are a scientist and entrepreneur.
Yeah, I guess so.
You don't like the word entrepreneur that much?
No, it's not one thing. The way I look at it is the technology that we developed was not in the search of being entrepreneurial. It was more in the search of solving societal problems that I'm really passionate about. And then, so in a way, became a founder of a technology company almost by accident, because we started developing the foundation of the thinking, the science, the mathematics, then the partnerships, obviously, to bring all the people on the table that we needed, so that we were not reinventing the wheel, because we're partnering with a few people around the world to make sure that we add value in the areas that people had not developed, instead of trying to develop something that already existed. So in a way, the technology was simply responding to things that I'm really passionate about in terms of trying to address global challenges and issues, rather than me saying, I want to be an entrepreneur, what can I do? And which I think is a different approach.
Totally. But if you think about it, that's the mindset of an entrepreneur as well, seeing problems in the world and wanting to solve them.
Yeah. So that's what we've been working on for the last 2 years. In the consulting business, in a way, it's the same thing, trying to address issues and very much related to the things that we're trying to address with the technology, but in a much more individualized way, where you work one-on-one with each of the clients. And obviously you do strategic studies, and then you wait a few years for things to come to fruition. the technology, obviously, as you would know, one of the ideas is to see how we can go from doing individual projects where you can reach organizations and maybe the people who live in those areas where you're implementing those ideas or recommendations to something that you can scale and actually address problems at a global level, and then be able to help people in a much more meaningful manner.
What type of problems do you solve?
Yeah, so I'm an environmental scientist, and then I've been working for over 20 years now in transportation and planning. So everything that relates to mobility, primarily in urban environments, but it could be regional towns and even national parks and things like that. And as an environmental person, one of the things that I'm really passionate about is trying to reduce the carbon footprint or the greenhouse gas emissions associated with moving people and moving things around. And then linked to that is things related to air pollution and the impacts it has not only on health of humans, but also on the environment. And then there's a cascading set of impacts that mobility has in terms of noise and the impacts those have on wildlife, but also on human health. And then you have things related even to water pollution and water use. And then more recently, I've been getting involved in the health implications of the way we move around on a daily basis. So how inactive people around the world have become, particularly in developed countries, but generally speaking around the world, because of motorized modes of travel that we use on a daily basis. So those are the things that I'm looking to address. And I have a short presentation that I'll go through when we get there, and I'll be talking about a few of those things. And obviously in the context of the current situation, how we've had to adapt our thinking to be able to make not only our technology relevant from a commercial perspective, but also trying to see how the technology that we have developed can help address some of the challenges that are being presented by our current situation globally.
I already have a million questions. So primarily you're working with government, like public transport organisms?
Yeah, so from the consulting business, our primary clients are municipal agencies. So in a Melbourne context, it would be City of Melbourne. We do a lot of work for City of Melbourne for the municipal government. And we also do work for state government agencies, so like Department of Transport or the transport operators. In a Melbourne context, again, would be like Yarra Trams or Public Transport Victoria. And we also do work for private developers, whether it's property developers looking for approvals for things that they want to do. And we try to either help them with the approvals process or in a more meaningful way, try to influence the way they plan communities or even just separate buildings or whatever it is that they're developing, and infrastructure developers as well. So those are the people who are implementing public transport systems or road infrastructure projects, and how we can embed our sustainability thinking and the way we look at problems in a much more holistic way than I think most people in this space do, to try to minimize the impact of our daily mobility. So we do a lot of work related to promoting walking and cycling in cities and communities. We do a lot of work in terms of how you can make public transport more efficient and more attractive to people. We also do a lot of work in literally how to make it more difficult for people to drive, because one of the things that I found through my career is that it's like everything in life, you need incentives and disincentives. So the carrot alone doesn't work, you need the stick as well. And so we do a lot of projects that are, and obviously we frame them in the context of there's good outcomes for the community, particularly those communities where you're implementing those projects. So for example, we've been working with City of Melbourne over the last few years on their climate change strategy related to reforestation. So they want to have more trees and more green spaces, less hard surfaces that are bad from an urban heat island effect and climate change perspective. And the main impediment to implement those projects is traffic and parking. And once you address those concerns that you have either from the local community or from regional movements of people, then you can say, yes, it is possible to reduce lanes of traffic or remove traffic parking spaces, and then so that you can expand parks and you can plant more trees. And that collectively, each project independently may seem very small, but collectively that can have a massive impact in the city's strategy from a climate change or reforestation perspective.
Wow, it's a super interesting topic, and you're basically helping to save the world. I love the purpose.
One of the things that I say, and this is partly the motivation for the technology, is that as much as I really enjoy a lot of the work that we have done, and that we did a lot of work for the Botanic Gardens, so all the domain parklands, and we've been proposing that even the road that goes around the Botanic Gardens could potentially be closed. You could have like a Central Park type environment where you just have the park is completely open simply for people who are on foot or bikes or scooters and things like that. But in a way, in a funny way, I'm helping one of the most livable cities in the world become even more livable. And I think that technology then help us reach other places in the world. And that's part of what I'm striving to do. It's still early days and obviously still fighting to get some traction and things on the ground happening. But that's part of what we are truly motivated by.
That's great. And when you say the technology, are you talking like measurement systems that are measuring pollution, for instance, traffic, movement in general, or what? How can we make more tangible the word technology?
And when I get into the presentation, I'll talk into some of the details. But at a high level, at a high level, start now, and then we can jump into the presentation if you want, unless you want to ask me some more general questions first. But at a high level, what we have is a technology that takes the information or the data that is collected by smartphone sensors, even wearable sensors, but primarily smartphone sensors because the sensors are of much higher quality from a precision perspective. But we look at information from the accelerometer, magnetometer, gyroscope, and GPS. We're working with a company in Belgium that specializes in this. And we take that information, and then that allows us to understand what people do on a daily basis. So we can infer in real time whether people are walking, cycling, in a train, in a tram, in a bus, in a car. If someone's in a car, we know if they're driving or a passenger in the car. And then we use that information to aggregate data to then understand individual movement patterns, but also collective movement patterns.
But this, you have this app installed in a group of people scattered around the city or the country.
You've already asked the most important question, which is how do you disseminate or how do you implement it? And yes, you do need an application, of course. And there's two ways of doing it. You either develop something and then has intrinsic value for people, and you hope that people take it up, which I think is very hard to do, or you engage with people who already have a captive audience of members or users or a community of stakeholders that then you embed your science into their app so that then you can start collecting that information. And examples would include a public transport operator. And of course, there's a lot of privacy issues, and we can get into those as we continue through the conversation. But let's assume a city around the world, Melbourne, for example, wanted to really understand how people move in the community. If you were to embed what we have into the app, say for PTV or for Yarra Trams, you would immediately have the movement pattern dynamics of millions of people that move around the metropolitan area in a normal world. Obviously, right now things are
of course. Now everything changed.
Or you can go at a smaller scale, and you can say, which is part of what we're discussing at the moment with a couple of organizations. You can go to a health insurance company, and you can say, you embed this into the wellness application that you already have, and that people use it to get rewards or points, or to do whatever it is that they do in terms of engagement with the health insurer, then you can start collecting that information to then provide value to users. In that case, for example, about physical activity recommendations, so how to be more active as part of your daily life. So it's always about engaging with people that have that. My ultimate dream is that this all is open source, fully transparent, where people have full ownership of their data, and that's so that you can decide who uses your data for what purpose, and if it makes sense, at what price. So if I wanted to think about myself, I would say nonprofit organizations that have an environmental or social focus, or even government agencies at the local level, I may say you can use my information freely, and I don't care about, as long as you're not pointing me out or singling me out specifically, I'm very happy to share my information. If it's private organizations like developers, I may say that's okay if you use my aggregate pattern data, but I want to be rewarded or compensated somehow. Or I may decide that there's certain types of organizations that I decide not to share the information with. And I think obviously very early days for us, but very early days generally speaking, because these protocols don't really exist or have been tested and implemented using blockchain and other mechanisms to truly preserve privacy while still allowing you to participate. And one of the examples is what's happening right now with COVID Safe, where I've talked to a lot of very intelligent people who are very well-intentioned, who believe in social good, and they say, I'm not 100% sure I'm ready to download this into my phone. And so there's obviously lots of considerations in terms of privacy, in terms of how do you really guarantee to people that the information is decentralized.
Yeah.
If we're talking about that, say, health insurance example, well, they may want to use that to be able to provide incentives for people to be more physically active, because that reduces their sedentarism, it
Healthier
reduces their
people.
health risk. Exactly. So it reduces claim costs, it increases life expectancy, meaning more revenue for those organizations and less expenditure. But you can imagine that if they were to own the data, they could then use that information to profile individuals and to then charge people different rates based on who they are, how they behave, being funny,
Like,
how often they go to the pub, how often
like
they
the car insurance risk
Exactly.
ranking.
Exactly. So you have to be careful. You have to decentralize the data. You have to think about ways to make sure that people can use the ratings or the information to inform their members or their clients, but in a way that ultimately I wouldn't want my insurer to know everything that I do, but I would be happy for them to give me recommendations on how I can live a healthier life, which means you need a third party. And because I'm not going to engage, I'm not just going to release that information to them directly. So of course, we're dealing through all of that, and we're working with Swinburne University and a few other places around the world on that particular issue. Like, how do you build a platform that is actually all about that ownership and transparency and openness of the data, so I can decide, yeah, you're my friend, I'm happy for you to see everything that I do, but with other people, I'm only happy for them to see me as one of many people that live in South Bank.
Anonymous or something like that.
Yeah,
because I really like the challenge, because on one side, okay, privacy, but on another side, this is data that could be really, really helpful for the whole society, for whole humankind, even at some level. So
absolutely. And to use a very simple example, and I use it all the time because most people are not aware of this, and it's not because people are not curious. I think it's because the information is very obscured. Is when we make decisions about public transport systems like the metro here, or we make decisions about road projects like the Western Tunnel, all those decisions are based on very limited, very sparse, and very untimely, but what I mean by that is collected every few years data. Because still to this day, when we're thinking about making investments that are billions of dollars of public money, also private money, but from a social good perspective, you're worried more about how the public money is being spent as taxpayers' money at the end of the day. And this is decided based on information that is collected every 5 to 7 years using surveying manually. And but when I mean manually, it could be on the computer, it could be on the phone or an app. But if you're asking people questions, it's still being collected manually. And it's basically people self-reporting what it is that they do. I call it the vagaries of human memory, because most people don't remember what they did a week ago or 2 weeks ago. And these are questions
or this morning.
Exactly. Yeah, that's true. And maybe now people remember more because we're going nowhere.
It's easier.
Exactly. But it's really interesting because you're basing decisions that amount to billions of dollars in a city, meaning trillions of dollars globally, that are based on about 0.2% or 0.5% of the population, questions that are asked about a past event or a past day or a past week in a person's life. And then you use census data to scale it up and say, this is how we think people in this city move, thereby we need this metro or this road or this or this or that. And I think that's very archaic. Well, I'd go even further. I think if it was in any other sphere of society, it would be illegal to do this. But we have become accustomed to the fact that decisions in the transport space are made on very, very limited data. And most people don't know. Most people think that all these transport models, they must be based on amazing data. Well, it's very sparsely collected. And this is one of the things that we could help to unravel, is making decisions based on real data, and also understanding from a social perspective. And I know you come from Argentina, for me coming from Colombia, where obviously there's much more disparity in terms of income distribution and access to services, and how much time people spend going to work and doing all the different things that they have, how long it would take someone in a poor neighborhood in Bogota to go to the doctor when their child has an emergency versus someone who lives in an upper class neighborhood, and all those different things. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence of some of these things. And now some of the big data aggregators are starting to look at these things, but we don't really know. And how can we plan or respond to social infrastructure challenges or community challenges if we don't really know how people move in our communities? So I think more and more we're going to start seeing a shift to having more data that is farmed from people's phones and devices. But then again, like we're seeing with what's happening here with the contact tracing app and what's happening around the world right now, even in the face of a pandemic that is a global emergency, privacy still remains paramount. And it is good that it remains to be a paramount concern for citizens around the world.
Yeah.
But we need to start making sure that those people who are going to be tracking or monitoring us are individuals or organizations that we can trust. And because there's a lot of distrust in many places, not only with government, but with the private sector. And how can you truly decentralize it? And I'm not saying that I'm the person people should trust. I'm just saying these are challenges that we all have to work with.
Yeah. It would be good for humanity to trust in these organisms, because that information really will impact life of people. But at the same time, you see things like Facebook and Cambridge Analytica that they use your data to elect a president, for instance.
Exactly. Well, I actually had a conversation today with an individual who said precisely that and the danger here is, and which is why we're working, and we may not get everything right, of course, and there'll be many things that we'll try to correct as we continue our journey. But we're working with people trying to anticipate what the concerns of this technology could be, and rather than releasing the technology and then waiting to see what happens. And the Facebook example is a great one, because you could argue that who could have thought that 20 years down the line, this would be a mechanism to influence democratic elections around the world, when it was simply about sharing information with friends and maybe family. But it's an unintended consequence that if we're not careful with technologies, say like the one that I'm going to talk about more in a more formal way in a few minutes, then you could have a lot of unintended consequences. And we touched upon a couple of them. If it's an insurance company, they could start benefiting those people, or openly benefiting those people who are healthy, and punishing those people who are already unhealthy and who actually are the ones who need the most help. And then you could imagine that happening across a wide range of issues where you have a good objective in mind, but the technology has many unintended uses that people can then apply it for more nefarious purposes, and then you're stuck with a system that ends up defeating the whole purpose of good that you intended to embark in the beginning.
Exactly. Very interesting topic. But if you want, we can go straight away to your presentation.
Sure, happy to do that.
I don't want to spoil more things with my questions.
No, that's okay.
I have just one question related to the context. You mentioned that you were working with pollution levels, and we were talking about the quarantine. Were there significant pollution level changes in the city here in Melbourne thanks to the quarantine?
I've talked to people because I don't work on that directly, but I've talked to people from the Environmental Protection Agency, and traffic obviously has decreased significantly. Yeah. And then with that, there's reductions in air pollution coming from vehicles. I haven't seen data in terms of how it's changed from like factories and things like that. But of course, as people have seen from news pieces around the world, pollution levels dropping, and then animal sightings, some fake news, some real news. And but yes, obviously, when you stop, mobility is one of the main contributors to not only greenhouse gas emissions, but also to air pollution. So if you stop people from traveling as much as they normally do, then of course you're going to have that as an unintended good consequence of the current situation. And there's obviously nothing comes free in life. And there's now, I just read this morning, there's a study that just came out from Massachusetts, not related to pollution, but related to traffic safety, where they say traffic dropped by more than 50%. Road fatalities are exactly the same, which means people are driving faster, more aggressively than they normally would because there's higher levels of traffic. So again, you say you quarantine people, less pollution, there's less traffic, and then all of a sudden people drive like maniacs and they're killing each other on the road. On a per vehicle perspective, at double the rate. So, but those are the things that data can help you try to understand, and that's part of what I'm really interested in seeing how we can contribute to that ongoing global debate. So yes, I'll jump into the presentation. What I'm going to do, just to set the scene, is talk a little bit about the genesis of the technology, the interest in what we're trying to tackle in terms of challenges, then what the technology does, and then some of the applications, and then talk a little bit about how that's all changed because of the current environment and what we're doing about it.
Great, sounds amazing, super interesting.
Okay. Thanks, Lucas.
Go for it.
Yeah, let me know. I'll put this on and let me know when you can see it, and I'll put it on full screen mode.
Yeah, there I'm seeing your screen.
And it should be coming up now.
Facebook
there
has a little delay of 30 seconds, but yeah, they are already seeing the screen as well. So
okay. And because we've talked a little bit about, I'll just jump right into it. And I mentioned it before. One of the things that I'm really passionate about is climate change. This is part of what I studied when I was doing my postgrad in Boston over 20 years ago, and what I've been either directly or indirectly working on, which is trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in my line of business from the transport sector. And just two very high level numbers just to call people's attention. And the first thing I say almost half jokingly is right now people have forgotten all about climate change. And so a few months ago we had raging fires in Australia. Now no one talks about this because of obviously the global pandemic. But still, I think it's important to keep in mind that just like the virus is not going anywhere anytime soon, climate change issues are definitely not going anywhere anytime soon. And there's recent studies that suggest that we're going to pass a debt to young people, meaning people under 30 years of age, of $500 trillion simply from climate change impacts. Basically, that means we're making all our children completely in debt for the rest of their lives. And climate change is also expected to, during the next 10 years alone, push more than 100 million people into poverty that wouldn't have been pushed into poverty otherwise. So obviously, these are massive numbers.
Sorry, can I interrupt to go a little bit deeper in those numbers? I think they are very interesting.
Yeah.
So what does it mean that we are giving our young people $500 trillion
in debt? Basically, that means that's how much money you need to, this is United Nations saying this is how much money you're going to have to spend to address the impacts of climate change from an infrastructure, public health, agriculture, and all other sectors perspective. And as it's happening right now with the relief packages that we're receiving here in Australia, money doesn't come from thin air. So if you put money out, it's coming from somewhere. So by addressing all those impacts, if the estimates are that by 2030, governments around the world will have spent $500 trillion simply in addressing impacts related to climate change.
2030, that's 10 years from now.
Yeah, exactly. And not all of them are directly, because it's not just that everything is spent directly on this. It's things that you are doing to try to alleviate future impacts, or that you're responding to current impacts. And of course, what's tricky here, and that's why those numbers you have to be very cautious about how you present them, is these are expectations of what happens in the next 20, 30, 50 years. And which is what you're talking about, passing that debt over the lifetime of, say, someone who's a child right now. But then these are all based on the linkages between climate change impacts and what happens, or climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, and what happens in terms of impacts. And as you would recall, even with the fires here, there was a lot of political and scientific debate as to, is this attributable to climate change? Is it only because of climate change, or is it because of bad agricultural or forestry practices? And of course, it's very difficult to unravel all of those relationships. But there's a reputable scientists, people around the world saying, and the number doesn't matter. What matters is we're going to spend a whole lot of money trying to tackle the impacts associated with climate change. And because climate change, as most things around the world, end up affecting those people who are already on the margins of poverty, then because of shifts in rainfall patterns, in drought patterns, because of fires, because of more frequent extreme events from a climate or weather perspective, the UN estimates that about 100 million new people will be pushed into poverty by 2030 because of climate change impacts alone.
Wow. And that will drive 100 million people into poverty
by 2030 is the expectation from the recent studies from the United Nations. So that's only 10 years away. So 100 million new people will be, and poverty by the UN definition of poverty. So which is, and this includes people who are displaced because of events, and how this exacerbates obviously political tensions in many areas around the world. And there's many other things that related to climate change, and how it links to what we do, or my passion in my everyday work. Anywhere between 20 and 30%, depending on where you are in the world, or what study you're reading, or who you believe, but anywhere between 20 and 30% of global greenhouse gas emissions, which are the contributors to climate change, come from transportation. And if you think about simply people in cars, not moving, not trains, not airplanes, not freight in boats or trains or anything, simply people in cars and not buses, not public transport, is about 10 to 15% of global greenhouse gas emissions is people simply driving from point A to point B.
Sorry, how much did you say?
10 to 15%.
10 to, it's a bunch.
Yeah, so
it's crazy.
Either 1 in 6 or 1 in 10, somewhere in between, it's simply people zippering around in cars. And my argument is that a lot of it is because of the very poor way that we have designed our cities over the last 50 years.
Totally. Yeah, it's a pain to move in public transport many times. So
yeah, well, many people don't have access to public transport because once you get outside the main areas in a city, you don't have the density to justify investments in public transport.
Exactly.
And even in Melbourne today, and again, one of the most livable cities in the world, but you see the fringe being expanded year by year. So people living farther and farther away from the economic centers of activity, which means they have to travel longer distances to come to work. And even when you think about the communities itself, because traveling to and from work is only about 20% of all trips, the other 80% is education and shopping and everything else that we do. But even in those more remote communities in suburban areas or outer suburban areas, you don't have the density to even be able to have a local milk bar or a local supermarket or a school that's within relative proximity of your house. So you end up driving even for the most basic things. And you look at suburban areas in cities around the world, the US, but also here in Australia. And sometimes, and we've done a lot of studies on this, we did a recent project for Geelong a couple of years ago, and where in some areas, the closest place to your home where you can buy simply breakfast food is 2 to 3 kilometers away from where you live, which means you have to drive.
Yeah, you have to drive.
And because unless you're a freak about walking like me, you drive.
Yeah, exactly. No, and you have to have the time to walk.
Yeah, exactly.
Kilometers.
And that's the thing. It means you have to be already in a privileged position enough to say, I can invest the time. I can use the time either because my work allows me to use the time while I'm walking to do that, or I have so much free time that I'm actually able to do that, which is not the reality for most people.
No, but also having the body, like elderly people won't be able to walk that much, and well, yeah.
I'm glad you said that because we'll get into that in a second, and that's a good segue to the other thing. And there's many things that we can address, or we believe we can address through our technology, but the two main ones I just talked about, climate change. The other one is physical inactivity. There's an estimate right now, again, from the World Health Organization, that about 2 billion people in the world are insufficiently active, meaning that they don't meet the basic minimum standards of how much you need to be active on a daily basis to remain healthy. And that causes 3.2 million people to die prematurely simply because they're not active enough. These are worldwide statistics. And that the cost of those people to the global economy is $4 trillion per year because of lost opportunity, because of the medical costs, everything that goes along with that. So we have a pandemic of COVID-19 at the moment. We have a pandemic of inactivity that is just brewing in the background that is causing all sorts of chronic diseases that are limiting people's ability to have a healthier life, but also crippling healthcare systems all over the world.
Yeah, 2 billion people is like
that's
almost
one
a third of.
Yeah, that's almost 1 in 3. Yeah, that's almost 1 in 3.
A third of the whole population. Wow.
And so what we're doing about it is and like I think I mentioned briefly before, we've developed a technology and we're collaborating with a company in Belgium, a company in Colombia, and universities in the US and here in Australia, where we farm the information from smartphone sensors, and that allows us to know what people do, where they go, why they go places, and how they move between those places, which is obviously very important to understand those movement patterns. And we understand that at a very granular level, and then we aggregate that information to infer patterns at a neighborhood, city level, or for cohorts of individuals that you're interested in, if it was, for example, from a health perspective. What we're working on now, which touches directly on what you pointed out a couple of minutes ago, Lucas, is we're now working with the Harvard University Medical School. We have an active project that, of course, been delayed because of the current situation. But what we're doing is just like we use, smartphone sensors now to understand what people do. We want to now use those same smartphone sensors to, through artificial intelligence and machine learning, understand who people are from a physical capability perspective. So we want to be able to detect how far and for how long people can walk without feeling pain or discomfort. And again, this is 1 billion people in the world suffer from mobility impairment. And there's most of the technologies out there are designed for people who are fit and healthy and relatively young, so they can even be fitter and healthier. And so what we're trying to do through this is transfer the knowledge that right now is only available in rehabilitation facilities to mobile devices so we can reach billions of people. Because right now, you only get to a rehabilitation facility when you've had a major life event. And if you're lucky and live in a rich enough country where you actually have those types of facilities, and then you go through the rehabilitation process. What we want to do is help people be more physically active, so you have less people getting to that situation, because a lot of these people is not just accidents, it's people who progressively deteriorate their knees or their hips, their joints, because of overweight, because of sedentarism, all the things that then affect the way your movement system, the biomechanics of your body progress over time. And we're trying to come up with ways to understand how truly capable people are, so that the recommendations that I make for someone like me are different to the ones that I make for my dad, and they're different to the ones that I make for someone who's overweight or has bad knees or has a bad back, so that we can infer simply by looking at how people walk, whether they have knee osteoarthritis, and then what are their true capabilities. And once we have those thresholds, then we use that as the limit that we can push people to. So there's no point me saying, and getting on a high horse and saying, I want people to walk more because it's good for the environment and it's good for their health. If, like you said, people, and this is a lot of people, don't have the physical capability to, without feeling pain or discomfort, getting to that train station or that tram stop or that bus stop, or going to the shop without driving, simply because they don't have that ability. And we need to be able to infer that or detect that, so that we can make recommendations that are cognizant of those limitations, but then enable us to push those people to progressively get healthier, so that then you can increase that threshold or capability margin that they may have. So to summarize those two, go ahead, Lucas.
No, so the recommendations, you say transfer the knowledge from rehabilitation. That would be like, for instance, recommending exercises.
Exactly. So what we want to do is be able to come up with personalized routines of activity, primarily walking, because that's the most natural form of exercise and the one that most people can do. Of course, there's limitation, and we need to think about ways we can expand our technology to include people who are in wheelchairs or who may have other types of mobility impairment. But generally speaking, is how can we understand what the limits are for people to walk, so that we can create personalized routines? And what I mean by that is, I need to be able to come up with bouts of exercise. So someone who's in their 60s and has overweight issues and has a bad knee and has some types of chronic cardiopulmonary conditions, we say this is the maximum you can do at a given point in time. So 10 or 12 minutes at this speed, not more than this distance. And you can do that 3 or 4 times a day. And then what we do with the rest of our information is say, well, are there opportunities in that person's daily life where we can find the way to integrate those opportunities? And that's exactly what I'm going to get into. So we understand what people do and who they are, and then what we do is we do retrospective analysis of people's routines, so that we can identify opportunities for people to be more physically active as part of their daily life, and obviously integrating that concept of capability or limitations that people may have, so that we can say, I'm going to identify opportunities in your daily routine for you to be more physically active, but that are commensurate with who you are as an individual. Because what happens now is that all systems that are out there treat us all as identical people. So everybody that is in this virtual room, we all query Google Maps or Apple Maps or whatever it is, and we say, I want to walk from point A to point B, and it's the same point A and point B for all of us. It will tell us exactly the same thing, even though we all walk differently, we all have different capabilities. And
it's the same route.
It's exactly, and the same time. It would actually say that it would take us all the same time to walk from point A to point B. So what we want to do is tell people how active they can and should be, and when, where, and how to be active as part of their normal routine with little or no time investment. Because the main limitation for people to exercise is lack of time. So what I want to do is, and this is just a quick example, and this is a real person, a routine here in Melbourne. On the left side It was the before we intervened with our algorithms. That person was doing about 58 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity per week as part of their normal routine, which means they were almost 100 minutes short of the 150, which is the recommendation for the World Health Organization, Heart Foundation, and many bodies, health bodies around the world. Our algorithms then looked at that routine and then identified inefficiencies in the way this person was moving, and then identified opportunities to embed walking into daily life that was in tune with what we had seen that person was able to walk. And that person was then achieving 143 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity per week. So only 7 minutes shy of the recommendations from the World Health Organization, without having to invest a single minute of extra time traveling in their day, in their weekly routine. Mm-hmm. And because of that, I call it the gift of time for people to be healthy. And because every minute that we don't drive and we walk, or we don't get on a train or a tram or a bus and we walk, we're also reducing emissions. I call it the gift of time for people to be healthy and at the same time change the world from a climate change perspective. So that's where we were. And like I said, we are about to launch a couple of projects with health insurance companies, wellness organizations, doing some work with transport operators. And then, as we've been discussing, the world changed, and the world changed very quickly. And as you can imagine, go ahead.
No, continue.
And as you can imagine, our whole premise is we want to make people more physically active by getting them out in the community, exercise as part of their daily routine without knowing that they're exercising, so that they're walking to and from places that before they were using public transport or driving. Well, the world changed. We're all being told to stay at home. Everybody's working from home unless you're an essential worker. If you're an essential worker, chances are you just want to get there as quickly as possible. Public transport is a potential place for higher risk of contagion than being in a private vehicle or walking, because of surfaces, because of more people being in those vehicles that you're sharing. So all of a sudden, all those things that we've been building this for are out the window. And the main implications is the work we're doing with Harvard Medical School was for older people with knee osteoarthritis, or young people who are over-exercising and also have problems with their knees. All of that is out the window because we can't be recommending people to be out walking. So that project ends. And then the projects that we're about to launch with health insurance and wellness organizations all end as well, because we're not going to be telling people to walk when we're all being told legally to stay at home. Yeah, so we've had to, but in a way, I think it's like everything. It's this, you can see it as a challenge, you can see it as an opportunity, I think, and obviously pivoting or reinventing yourself. And
eventually everything is going to should go back to normal, maybe in a year and a half or whatever, but eventually it's going to be back to normal, and all this system will you can already put it in place.
Absolutely. And we're already having conversations with some of those organizations where we stop those projects, where they're saying, even in a limited mobility world where the economy starts slowly being turned on and off as we go through the different waves of the pandemic, that they're interested in progressing with those studies. So that's okay. And like you say, the physical inactivity, the climate change challenges are not going to go away. So we're confident that over time, we'll still be able to actively participate in helping to address those challenges that we're passionate about. But then in the meantime, we say, well, what can we use the technology that we have at our disposal that can also help to inform important decisions that are relevant immediately, meaning now, not in 6 months when the economy reopens or whenever that happens, but now because of life and death decisions that people are making in the healthcare setting, and then when people start being reintroduced back to the workforce. And because of the ongoing relationship that I've had with the Harvard Medical School, I was invited to be part of an innovation task force that the health or hospital network in Boston has assembled to try to address how they're going to respond to the current challenges as healthcare organizations. And then through all the dialogue that has come out of that, we've been developing then on the background a product that we have ready to deploy. All we need to do is now, we built all the architecture, we've done tests, and all we need to do is now get either pilots or actually get some projects so we can personalize and tailor what it is that we want this to be used for. And it's highly relevant because now the government is saying that the buck stops with employers when they make the decision to bring people back to work. So I'll jump very quickly into it, and then that way we can open up to questions or commentary in the discussion. So what we're doing is a workforce management and intelligent analytics platform. And very quickly, what we've created is a dynamic rules engine that then takes a lot of data inputs, and I'll go into those in a second. And then we do an intelligent triage to be able to inform decisions that are important initially for healthcare organizations, but also for any type of workplace that is considering going back to work. And this, without going into the detail, but what we have is we look at things like symptoms, we look at things like risk profile of individuals, and then we look at the contact tracing or the contact that you have in a workplace with colleagues. And then we also look at what happens in a community setting. And then we put all that together to say, well, what kind of decisions can we help individuals or organizations make? And some of the things that we're looking at, to jump directly into some of the examples, is how can you assess the risk that an individual may have? So say, let's assume it's a doctor, and this particular doctor is in an emergency room in a hospital, and all this was built with a Boston context in mind, but it could apply anywhere. And then you say, what we're saying is that how you make decisions about when to allow people to go back to work, or when to send them home, or when to test them, should be based on a very comprehensive risk assessment, where you consider how the symptoms of those individuals, the health or risk profile of that individual, and his or her family members or people they cohabitate with, the people that they're in contact with in a hospital setting, patients, rooms, or other colleagues, and then how they move around in the general community, so that we can come up with a general score and say who's green, meaning can go to work, who's yellow, meaning should be tested, and who's red, meaning they should either go to the doctor or stay home, or whatever it is that you want to do. And
sorry, and where do you get the data for the symptoms mainly? Because the other information, I get it where you can get it from, but symptoms, like for instance from the family,
there's a lot of symptom trackers or checkers that have been developed. So we've been in conversations with a couple of companies. One group based in Seattle, Swinburne University here has developed one already, and there's an app that you can find in the store that actually allows you to go through symptoms. The federal government has the coronavirus app, not the COVID state, but the coronavirus app. So so it's all about collaborating with people who already created this mechanism, so that you can say, okay, I'm going to self-report my symptoms. I'm going to go to work, and someone's going to check my temperature. So that's one component. But then I'm also going to put in this information database that I have, if I had a child that had some immune system problems, then that makes me have a higher interest in being safe, because I could really hurt that individual who's at home with me. And then who am I interacting with in the hospital setting, and what am I doing in the general community, so that then I can say, well, who do I test first? Because this is a challenge that organizations, even healthcare institutions, are having around the world, which is we have a limited number of test kits. We have more people that work here than test kits. How do we allocate them, prioritize them? And once we run out, who do we start? Do we simply go, if it's 100 people and we only get 20 at a time, do 20, then the next 20, the next 20, and so forth, and then go back to number one? Or do we say, well, these people are not identical, which is the same premise I was using before about the exercising and the physical activity. We're not all identical. We're all very unique. We all have different family situations. We all have different health backgrounds. We all have different lifestyles and lives that we engage, how we engage with the rest of the world. And what we're saying is all those factors combined need to be considered when you're deciding who you're going to test more frequently and how you're going to prioritize that process. So that's one potential use case. Another one is, well, who do you allow to go back to work? And this is, say, not talking specifically about the frontline workers, but a lot of the people who are in a healthcare setting but are staying at home because they're the lab directors and they're the research scientists and the data people and the support staff who you can have at home, but you would ideally want to have at work. But you don't want to bring them back to work if they're going to get infected or they're going to infect other people. So how do you can use that same triage process to then say, who is safer to go back to work first? So I bring those people first. So that would be green in that sort of like traffic light model. But then importantly, also, how do you get them to and from work in a safe way? Because, and this is a real example in Boston, one of the, and it's a Latin American population, suburb with a high concentration of Latin American people, is the hotspot for COVID-19 activity in the Boston metropolitan area at the moment. And if you live anywhere north of the suburb that sits right between you and the city, and you take a train that goes through the 2 or 3 stations that are through that suburb, and let's assume in a in a scenario where the economy has reopened and you're sharing that train with thousands of people, or the train station with thousands of people, then you're at much higher risk than if you live around the corner. And then how can you then, using our technology, which is all about movement, to then say, well, that's an area of risk. But not only that, because that's interesting information that doesn't give you any ammunition to change, but we can then say these are safer ways with lower level of contact or interaction with other people, so that you can get to work and not have to spend 3 extra hours, or not have to drive, because a lot of these people may not have a vehicle. So it's trying to answer all those questions. How you allocate resources between institutions. There they have multiple hospitals, and how are you able to allocate resources from a staff perspective and things like that. And then at a higher level, and we've developed this for Boston, for a Melbourne context, and a few other cities, this whole concept of physical distancing that people keep talking about, which is the one that presumably this weekend is going to be discussed here in Australia, is how are we going to get allowed to go back to having more activity in the community. And I think personally, and I'm not a health specialist, that everything that we're using at the moment, which is infection rates and number of new cases and recoveries and all those things, amazingly important information, but they're all by definition what I call lag indicators, meaning you're talking about things that happened 2 or 3 weeks ago, and you're using them today to make a decision. I believe what we should be doing is, in combination with the contact tracing system that the government is implementing, but we should also be trying to understand how well people are really behaving from a physical distancing perspective, not to punish individuals, not to coerce people, but simply to understand, are people really understanding that there's implications to the physical distancing rules, so that you can use that to inform testing protocols in particular communities, so that you can use it to inform areas that you need to provide more marketing and more information campaigns to say, look, we notice that even though we don't know if there's going to be new cases, there's a lot more activity than we would like to happen in terms of the number of people that are mingling around in certain parts of the city, so that you can then start to monitor things in a much more effective way. Of course, this would open amazing and incredible challenges from a privacy perspective, because the only way I can create this map of hotspots of activity is if I have thousands of people, tens of thousands of people allowing our system to understand what they do on a daily basis. And that's all I have in terms of a presentation. That way we can sort of like move to a discussion and questions if people in the audience have.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for the presentation. And everybody, we're talking with Jose Mantilla, founder of Motus Science, now with a very focused perspective on Corona and COVID-19. And so, yeah, I understand what you say. We need that data to be as comprehensive as possible, so it's realistic, and government can take like decisions, hard decisions based on real data, and as you said, not lag indicators. I have a first question, which is, so for instance, the case of the app that you developed on Boston, this is done, did you say by the government or by a private institution?
No, we haven't released this. What we did was we had people that we gave our own version of an app, and then that we started sort of like monitoring, and then we superimposed on top of that simulations. So thousands of simulations of people based on general patterns of movement, so that then we can create those maps. But no, we haven't released this in terms of with specific institutions. We're in conversations with different types of organizations here in Australia, in the US, and other places as to how this could be implemented. I believe that rather than the government, this will go with particular institutions, whether it's healthcare, hospitals, or clinics, or with employers who say, I have an interest in understanding how to bring people back to work safely. What are the things that I need to focus on to make sure that I am minimizing the risk of contagion and then having to shut down my operations, and then even potentially legal implications that people may have depending on the line of business that they're in. So this is, I think, and the government, like I said, has made it very clear that it's up to employers to actually decide how they when they're ready to go back to work and how they're going to manage that process.
And design the strategies. They have to do the design proposals to go back to work. I was asking because I was thinking from the business perspective, how do you monetize? Like who pays, who's the real customer, or at least how do you support the system? I know it's also for beneficial for the whole population, but you still are a company, so you need to support the whole business.
You monetize it by doing it's licensing agreements, and you do it on a per user per month basis. Presumably
with
that's
the companies. The companies mainly.
So whether it's, and it could be any types of organizations. It could be hospitals. A lot of them are non-profit, but they still have a responsibility to manage the health and safety of their workforce and their families by association. And then how do you then engage with those types of organizations to say this would be worthwhile to implement? And early days, and of course, we're just having a lot of conversations at the moment, but we're just trying to look at things in a more holistic way, and particularly leveraging the fact that through our already existing technology, we can provide insights in areas that other people cannot start tackling. And that because, like you said, symptoms, it's more about associations with other people, risk profiling. There's a lot of people that work in this space. The in-hospital or at-work contact tracing organizations will be doing that. I think is when you superimpose that community exposure, which is, in my mind, the really most important aspect when you're talking about a highly asymptomatic but still transmissible diseases. What are people doing when you're not tracking them in a hospital or workplace setting? What are the family members of that individual doing? Because it's not the same thing, someone who is single and then goes to work in a car, drives back home, and then orders Uber Eats and doesn't do anything else, than a person who's got 3 children, childcare, primary school, middle school, and then one of the 2 adults in the house is a volunteer at an aged care facility where you have the most vulnerable members of society. Well, if I had only those 2 employees, I'd be testing the latter one more frequently than the other one. And I think that's what we want to be able to inform. And the only way you can do it is if you understand those patterns of movement. Of course, you need people to engage and say, yes, it's okay for you to understand that.
Yeah, sure. Sure. Great. Super interesting. Well, again, we are opening it up to questions of the audience. In the meantime, I'm super interested with something that you mentioned or you showed, in fact, what was the map on how you helped a specific person to be more effective on the roads and the vehicles or transportation methods that they used, and that you helped them be more active, like so more healthy, so healthy benefits, and in the same time of traveling. And also you gave them recommendations on how to use more public transport instead of the car, and walking more instead of the car. So that's also helping with pollution. I connect also this thinking in this context again of COVID-19. A lot of companies are doing work from home, work remotely, and I think after or during this, this period until everything normalizes, a lot of companies are going to be even more open to do remote work. And even in the future, I think it's going to be something maybe more popular. This also will help with the pollution. If we change a little bit the mindset, the concept of working in a company, that will also help with pollution problems, right?
Absolutely. And I think it's really interesting because when I was working with the US Department of Transportation in the late 90s, so over 20 years ago, it was one of the top agendas of the Secretary of Transportation, which is the minister there, that the department had to promote telework, which was the official word back then. And it's more than 2 decades later, and we had to have a global pandemic for people to actually take telework seriously. And back then it was being promoted as a congestion reduction strategy, as an emissions reduction strategy. And you're absolutely right. This is one thing that will now change potentially the way organizations work around the world. Not all businesses or types of work are amenable to working from home, but a lot of them are. And you may still want people to come to the office on a regular basis, but you certainly don't need people going to work 5 days a week, especially when the distances that you need to travel primarily by car in many places in the world, including Melbourne, are just so large. And I think that will provide an opportunity for companies and businesses to rethink what it is that they even need to provide from a space perspective, and what are the strategies in terms of mobility. Does this enable you to really now start pushing for shared mobility options, so that then you start grouping people into clusters by where they live, and then even the company, whether it sponsors it directly, has its own vehicles, or works with Uber or whoever else to say, we're going to create movement opportunities for people so that not everyone's driving independently. Obviously, with self-driving vehicles, all this is going to be reimagined again. But you're absolutely right that there's an opportunity now to see how this can influence people's behavior. And this is, again, where understanding those movement patterns is critical to making those decisions.
Yeah, but it's also true that the government has to be aligned, because, for instance, if they want to incentivize people using the bicycle, we should have better bicycle routes, right? For instance.
And that's what I do in my normal consulting job, is to focus on how do you provide the infrastructure so people can actually make those choices. And even I live just right next to St. Kilda Road here in Melbourne, and it's the busiest bicycle route in the city. And I think it's quite dangerous to ride your bicycle there.
I take the bike every day. Well, I took the bike every day to work from St. Kilda Junctions all through St. Kilda Road to the city. And it's a little bit dangerous.
Exactly. So if we really want people to ditch the car and then get on their bikes, then we should be being much more aggressive, like a lot of European cities are being, in terms of providing those sort of safe opportunities for people to ride. And it's not just safety, is just the dignity. Like, why is it that when we get in a bicycle, we feel like we're putting our lives in our hands, but when you're in a car, you have all this comfort and ability to enjoy yourself? So I think it should be the reverse. And I think there's a lot of, this also provides an opportunity to reimagine cities. And I know many cities in Europe are saying, well, can we use this almost as the catalyst to even be more aggressive in terms of promoting modes of transport that are not reliant on people driving independently?
It's today I read an article that said that they are already seeing, but they expect even more, a boom in the sales of electric bicycles and electric scooters, because people don't want to, what you said, they don't want to be in public transport because there is a lot of people and the density inside the public transport. So probably we're going to see a high demand of this product, but also more traffic in more people on bikes, more people on scooters.
And then governments need to be responsive to be able to provide that infrastructure that enables that to happen. Because at the end of the day, what you really want is for people, not just, and I say this half jokingly, not just middle-aged men in Lycra to ride bicycles. You want children and older people and many more women than we have in a place like Melbourne riding their bicycles with dignity, sitting upright, not racing like they're trying to win the Tour de France, and because it's simply a humane way to move around. And I think we have those challenges. Those remain. I think that those things won't change. And like I mentioned before, I think it's a matter of when you have understanding, or you understand better the movement dynamics and patterns in places, then you can truly respond to the needs of the population.
Make better and more informed decisions.
Absolutely.
Obviously. Perfect. And talking, continue the talk about pollution, and maybe we start a little debate, but just to know your position. So I know that I can see the effect that humankind has in the context, in the nature, and in everything. I see it because I travel a lot and I see pollution everywhere. I see pollution in front of my house. I know the impact that we have. It's huge. But on the other side, I love history of the world, the history of humankind. And I know that in the billions of years that the planet existed, there were a lot of movement in terms of climate change, both the frozen era and both the volcano era. So are humans like accelerating natural climate change? Are we generating a climate change, or this is something normal that happens in the air on Earth every now and then?
Well, I think my strong belief is that human activity is accelerating climate change, and that what's happening. And when I was studying at MIT over 20 years ago, one of the things that I was always taught is that it's all about rates of things. So if you drop one drop of mercury into a river, that's not going to do anything, because it just dissolves so quickly, and then the natural body of water is able to support that and then to process it. But if you have 1,000 liters of mercury being dropped into a little pond, then very quickly that's going all to die out. And I think that's the same thing that is happening, is that we're now having for the first time in history over the last 50 years or so, we're just having such an accelerated rate of increases in emissions from transportation, from factories, from energy production and distribution, that we are pushing the ability of natural systems to process those emissions to the brink. And I believe that a lot of the, not single events, because that's what the science shows, that it's very difficult to link single events to climate change, but the frequency and severity of those things that are happening, like bushfires, unlike hurricanes, unlike droughts and all things like that, is increasing significantly because of that exacerbation of emission levels in the atmosphere. So I'm happy to agree with the leading scientists in the world in saying that I do believe that anthropogenic, which is human-made climate emissions or activity, is influencing climate change.
Perfect. Good to know. Yeah, yeah. The studies I read are all indicating that we are the worst thing for the.
And the way I look at it,
yeah.
Another angle to look at it, because it's sometimes, I think it's almost unnecessary sometimes to get bogged down into was the December, January, or, well, to be honest, in New South Wales, fire started a lot earlier than December, January, but really December, January was the peak of the bushfire season here in Australia. Was that climate change? I think that's irrelevant as a question. I think it's the fact that these things are happening more frequently. The fact that they're going to keep happening more frequently with larger severity is the issue, as opposed to a single event. And irrespective of that, what you argue from, say, look, if you look at our technology and what we're trying to do, what we want is people to walk more. And I think it would be hard to find this benefit of walking more, because you're going to be healthier as an individual. The community is going to be healthier. And even if you don't believe in climate change, you're going to be producing less air pollution, which kills children and sensitive people who have sensitivity to pollution all around the world, and the millions of people. And you're going to be reducing noise, you're going to be reducing congestion, you're going to be reducing energy consumption.
And
so
in an individual way, also you're saving money, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Walking is free. Well, you may go through more shoes and things like that, but that's
okay. but compared with gas for the car, I think
exactly.
It's still cheaper.
So I think sometimes of course it's important to have those debates from a policy perspective, because you want to make sure that governments are promoting cleaner forms of energy, that they're promoting cleaner ways to travel, that the mechanisms are there to enable local government, state government agencies, and industry to then really make that shift. And that needs to come from an informed policy dialogue that has to include all that scientific information that you were asking about. But from an individual perspective, I say it's irrelevant. I think we just need to be more efficient and more humane and less wasteful in the way that we operate. And not everything is by choice, because it's, again, very easy to say, I live in South Bank right next to the city. I haven't had a car for the 12 years that I've been living in Melbourne. It would be really easy for me to say, well, this is the way people should live. But I think that misses the point, that it's just, like I said before, cities have been designed in ways that force people to be highly reliant on motorized modes of private travel. And to the point that now transportation in many households around the world, in the developed world in particular, but in many places around the world, has become a higher expenditure in a home than the home itself. So people are spending more money traveling to and from work and shops and schools and everything else than they're spending for the place that they live in, which I think had never happened in history. And I think it just is the consummation of the absurdity of how we have developed our cities. If you're spending more money just moving around than in the place where it's your safe haven, which is the home that you have.
Totally. Well, maybe hopefully we can see a shift now after this context. Maybe we become more conscious, right? More aware.
There's silver linings in everything. So I think, I think there's an opportunity to change behavior, to reimagine cities in different ways, to reimagine workplaces, but obviously there'll be a lot of challenges also in the way we go back to some type of normalcy. What I say is that I actually hope, and this is my personal view, that we don't go back to the same normal that we had before, because the normal that we had before was completely unsustainable, and it was taking, in my view, the global environment, pushing it to the brink. And I also will quote something that I was taught when I was at MIT, which is the environment at the end of the day doesn't care, because the global atmospheric and systems and all the ecosystems in the world will find a way to find a new balance. The problem is that that new balance may not be one that we like as humans. So if you think you can talk about species extinction and all those different issues, which I care about being an environmental person, but if you talk about it from a human perspective, it's about survival, and it's about maintaining the type of life and dignity that we want to maintain. And the way we were living before this global pandemic was taking us, in my view, to a place that we were not going to like very much.
Okay, good, nice, interesting reflection. We have to start being more aware of all this and all the impact that our little day-to-day behaviors have on the impact that they have in the real world where we live.
No, absolutely. And everything counts. I think it's like everything in life is every small step, in this case, very literal if you're going from driving to walking, every step counts, and it counts for your health, for emissions, for all sorts of different things. But what we need to do is, and like the way I look at it is our technology is only an enabler. It's only one component, because like I said, if you're in one of those communities where everything is far, this is not going to help you. But what I think it could do also is inform that debate, because if you had enough evidence to really prove with data that people in certain types of communities are having to spend not just more money, but significantly more time to go to an emergency room, to go to the doctor, to go buy basic supplies and things, then that can help you inform that planning and policy dialogue as well. Because we need that information to then be able to go to government and say, we need to change the way community infrastructure services are provided. And I'll give examples of people in Bogota. People in Bogota in certain parts of the city will spend 4, 5, 6 hours of the day just going to and from work.
Yeah.
And how can you have a dignified life if you're spending 25% of the hours in the day simply traveling to and from work just to survive? This is not to be rich. This is just to survive. And if we had that evidence, it's not just, oh, we kind of know because we've surveyed people, but if we had enough people in some of those communities, and I'm not saying carrying my technology, but through whatever technology, really understanding those movement patterns, I would imagine that then you have information that enables those people to demand change. Because all of a sudden it's not just, oh, it's me and my life is tough, and but you have the evidence that in your neighborhood it's 6 hours, and in the neighborhood a couple of kilometers down the road is an hour and a half or maybe 2. And why? Because they live in a much more privileged part of the city, and that shouldn't happen. And this information can enable having those debates more openly. And of course, a lot of people are not going to want to see this data, but that's a different concern.
No, totally. No, at the end of the day, we go back to what is your purpose, really helping the world and really having a positive impact in the world. And that also means the citizens of the world and helping everybody to have equal access to what you say, for instance, health. Which is so important.
Yeah, absolutely.
And well, we are already over an hour and 10. I don't know if you have a couple more minutes.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, I wanted to go back to you and you as an entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. You when we were talking before, you said that you are a scientist, and by almost without wanting it or by chance, you became an entrepreneur. How is it to be a scientist entrepreneur?
I think it's obvious. I love the challenge of trying something new and the challenge of finding out if there's really an opportunity to try to change people's lives and for the better, but also improve the environment, which, like I've said, obviously many times I care about. And it's interesting in the sense that it's very different for me, and because I worked in government, then I worked in consulting in large organizations, then in consulting with my own business, where I know what I'm doing. I know what I need to do to convince a client to give me work, and then to deliver good, high quality work that then allows me to have a repeat business, to create a reputation and a name that then allows me to continue doing that, and then to be called upon to do certain types of things, and in a way that's comfortable, and I could say that I was also doing things that were good for the world in that work, but I didn't think it was enough. I didn't feel like I was really achieving sort of like my potential in terms of how much influence I can have in the world for the better. And this is where technology, in my mind, becomes critical, because it can provide that bridge to, like I think I've mentioned a couple of times in the conversation, to reach a much larger number of people and to have an impact at a much higher level. Yeah. Because you don't need to talk to each individual, or you don't need to sit in on a table, around a table with an organization to have that impact. Through technology, that you can impact many more people. So that's probably what keeps me going, obviously, despite of all the challenges and the setbacks and the failed grant applications and
that was my next question. That was my next question. So yeah. What were your main challenges as an entrepreneur?
Well, I think we're still going through it. It's still early days for us. We've done a lot of technology development. We've created an amazing team with very high levels of credibility in terms of industry players, data scientists, organizations that we're partnering with, universities around the world that we have convinced that what we're doing deserves attention, so to speak, and that there's merit in having a collaboration with, say, the Harvard University Medical School, which obviously a very reputable organization, and for us to be able to work with them obviously makes us really proud, and it confirms or it validates what we're trying to achieve. But it's early days in the sense that we're still yet to have real penetration in the marketplace and to actually have this be widely distributed. We don't necessarily want to do that in a blanket approach. We want to work with organizations that we're philosophically aligned with, and that where the privacy and all those other concerns that we discussed before are respected. But it's still early days for us. And the main challenge is you convince smart people that this is something that's worthwhile. You build those relationships and collaborations. You are convinced that what you're doing has merit and has the potential to change lives and the world for the better. But then having that extra next step, which is how do you turn that into a commercial opportunity, and not for the purposes of making money, but for the purposes of actually making it happen.
Yeah,
exactly. And even more than that, for making it
not
happen.
Survival of you. I mean survival of the project.
Yeah, exactly. Because
sustainable the project. Yeah.
Because you need that to be able to then continue that dream. And I think that's obviously the main challenge. And we've applied unsuccessfully, I'm happy to admit, to many grant programs. We've applied successfully to a few of them. We are in the process of trying to secure investment so that we can continue this. But I think it's just that product market fit is what's the most difficult to achieve, which is you talk to people, they say, yes, this is amazing, this would really help us. And then how do you translate that into a real project?
Yeah.
And that's where I know, and I'm reminded every day through my conversations, I believe I'm good at the relationship component of it, building relationships with people, selling and I'm using that word very liberally, the technology, the technical, the scientific aspects of what we're trying to do. I'm not very well versed on the commercial aspect, which is because in the consulting world is very different. I say, look, I'm going to do a really good project for you. And then you write a proposal and people say, yeah, this was better than the other ones. And then they give you a contract. This is different because you don't have that necessarily that one-on-one engagement, or you won't have once this is scaled. This becomes something that in a way takes a life of its own. And you also want to be careful not to get trapped into continuing to have this be a consulting business, but now with a very nifty technology, because you can't scale that either, because that means you're managing each contract as a consulting endeavor. And it's okay to start doing that in the beginning so that you can get that product market fit. But eventually this has to be through licensing agreements that then where you are managing those contracts, but in a much more removed way than the way I've been used to doing for the last 20 years of my career. And that's also has been challenging for me from a mindset perspective, because it's very easy for me to fall in the trap of selling a consulting project. When what we're trying to actually do is convince someone to adopt that technology, to then, whether or not we provide assistance is irrelevant, but to them to try to take that on their own to solve the problems that they want to solve. And that's where we are at the moment, both with
the bigger scope, basically.
Yeah, and that's where we are in terms of our normal work in physical activity and transport, but then also in this recent endeavor in the workforce management or healthcare space related to COVID-19 is how do you get that product market fit? How do you get one person, one reputable organization to say, not only I believe it's really good, and it would help us, but I'm actually willing to put my name and my money on the line to make it happen.
Yeah. implemented.
Yeah.
Good, good. Okay, and final questions to start wrapping it up.
Yeah.
What recommendation could you give to a starting entrepreneur? We have a lot of young people that are starting as entrepreneurs or have the dream of starting and being an entrepreneur. And we have a lot with a scientific profile. So what recommendation could you give particularly to those profiles in our community?
Well, I think the main, and like I said, I can't speak from 10 years of amazing success and all the entrepreneurial world.
You've done a bunch of things. You've done a bunch of things.
So people have to be very careful about how they take my suggestions or my information. But I think all jokes aside, I think from my perspective, it's about truly believing in what it is that you set out to do. And we've had so many setbacks that if I wasn't really passionate about changing the world in this case, but in other instances, it could be many different things, I would have given up and then just gone back to my normal business. So I think one thing I would say is that you have to really know why you're trying to do what you want to do. And it doesn't have to always be about saving the world. It could be anything. And of course, we all want it to be good things, but in general, it can be anything. And in whatever sphere or domain of knowledge or technical expertise, but it's really believing in the why you're trying to pursue that technology, that company, that business, that endeavor. Because with all the setbacks that are going to happen, irrespective of how well you plan and how well you're surrounded and all the connections that you may have and all the things that you may have going for you, there'll be many setbacks inevitably. And I think that belief, profound belief in the why you're doing things, in my case at least, is the only thing that has allowed me to say, okay, this is really tough. I really thought we were going to get this grant or this project, but I'm going to keep pushing because I believe that there's a reason why I'm doing this. And I think that's, if I didn't have that, I would have just moved back to what I was doing before. So I think I would invite people to just really reflect upon why is it that they're trying to do things. And because I'm a firm believer that in the commercial aspects or the marketing or the technical scientific aspects, you can always find people, if you believe in what you're trying to do, that will help you push those things forward. And the main example I can give is those tremendous collaborations that we've been able to build as a very small company, where it's really, to be very frank, it's really has been me pushing for those collaborations to get the opportunity to work with those organizations. It's quite humbling, but it also is because of that belief in what we're trying to achieve, which ultimately is what people sign up to join you for. And the other thing that the only other thing I will say is that, and this is not me saying it, this is what I keep being told over and over again, is that the founder as the individual is critical, because at the end of the day, that's what's going to drive a project or a company forward, at least in those early years. And because if you lose that faith or that drive, then things will dry up very quickly. So yeah, I think that's all I have.
The founder is critical.
Yeah, and I'm saying that as a founder, so I'm not speaking about me. I'm saying in general.
But I totally agree. The founder is critical, but at the same time, the founder is willing to create something that is bigger than him or her.
Of course, yeah, and that's why I think that willingness to collaborate and I think one other thing that I will say that you reminded me of what you just said, Lucas, is it's very easy when you're working in the technology space to get either disheartened because you open up a news article and someone's doing something similar to what you're doing. And then you go, oh, I've lost my opportunity. I was too slow or whatever. I think that happens because it's a big world and there'll be competitors no matter how clever your idea is. I think that's one. So don't get disheartened. Actually, that's what happened to me with that collaboration we have with this Belgian company. They actually have done with a lot of money that they've received in investment, the first thing that I wanted to do to be able to launch my technology company. And then rather than getting disheartened, I say, well, I'm going to reach out and see how we can collaborate. And I found out very quickly that what I was trying to do ultimately is completely different to what they were trying to do. So we can actually work together. And then I don't have to reinvent the wheel, which would have taken me years or perhaps wouldn't have never been able to do.
The power of collaboration is amazing. It's
exactly.
So powerful.
And I think and then the other aspect to that is that then understanding that you need to find people who complement you also at the individual level. So in this case was an organization that had something that we now can use as an input to what we do. And then of course that has implications from licensing and agreements, but I think those can be always managed. But then from a personal perspective is also finding people that complement you, because there's no point in, for me, finding someone else who just does exactly what I do. I need to find people who can help me from a marketing perspective, from a commercialization perspective, from a finance perspective, all the things that I don't know how to do. And it's difficult. And especially in those early days, because you're afraid that if you share what you're doing, someone's going to steal your idea. Maybe I'm being naive, but I'm no longer afraid. I've stopped being afraid a long time ago. I believe that if people see the kind of work that we're doing, even competitors potentially, I would imagine that they'd be more intelligent if they actually approached us and said, how can we work together, than if they've tried to do it on their own. Because we've already built enough that we can actually then leverage what other people have to do something even better together. And if some people decide to take the information that I'm sharing here or anywhere else and try to do it on their own or sell it to another company, that may happen, but I'm not going to lose sleep over it, because I think I found that every time I talk openly, I meet new people that could become partners, collaborators, channels. And it's precisely because of that openness.
Or connect you with somebody.
Exactly. And I think people know when you're honestly sharing and you're not holding back simply because it's a strategic advantage. And I don't believe in that. I think I want people to, anybody who's watching here or who will watch this presentation and this discussion, to say if they believe there's an opportunity to reach out, because I think that's the only way we can really make this happen. And if it was from different parts of the world, even better.
Again, the purpose is bigger than the individual organizations.
Absolutely.
And there is a term, I don't know if you heard about it, which is co-petitions. So instead of competition, co-petition, the mix between collaboration and competition.
Yeah, I participated in a few of those. I've lost, but I participated in a few of those.
Well, that's too bad to know it, but yeah, great, perfect. So as I wrote a little summary of the things that you said. So basically the founder is critical, but they build something that is bigger than them. So be very clear about solving problems, knowing your why, knowing your purpose, because you need it through the journey. And then I also brought back something that you said during the presentation, which is you had to pivot and adapt to this new context, which I think is crucial for any entrepreneur, be able to adapt to the context. It's not about what you want to do, it's also what the scenario allows you to do. So I
absolutely.
think that,
and again, I'm not an expert in this space, but I believe that like everything in life, you need to do it in a natural way. This whole concept of the workforce management platform and the potential collaboration with hospitals and doing something that goes way beyond what our technology is. What we're saying is, let's build this engine that takes all these different inputs. Some of them are from health organizations, from universities, from other startups, and then let's just put it all together. Let's reach out and get open source data from Google, from Apple, from Johns Hopkins University on active cases of COVID-19 around the world or in municipal areas that you're interested in. Put it all together to build something. And but when I started this journey of what we're now having as a potential product that we want to start having conversations with people about commercializing or at least testing more formally, I was thinking only about how, from my movement dynamic analysis perspective, I can contribute to this dialogue. And then I found through the conversations that I was having with different people, particularly in Boston, that there was an opportunity to actually integrate things with other people and build it myself, so to speak. And so in a way, the pivot has happened naturally, has been a big step laterally from what we were doing before, but we didn't force the issue. We didn't say, oh, wow, now people are stuck at home, big data is gonna be massive, so let's create something. It was more, we said, okay, how can we talk to you about this data that we have? And we started going through our usual suspects, to call it that way, our clients. So cities and transport agencies. Are you interested in understanding changes so that you can inform resiliency decisions for the future of this pandemic as it progresses over the next few years, or for future climate change impacts or anything else that disrupts the natural way of life of a city? And then we found out very quickly that everybody was sort of like scrambling to just respond to the emergencies, and we didn't get a lot of attention. And then through this group in Boston, we started just listening in, taking all the information, and we said, we can actually do something that's completely ours, that allows us to resolve a problem that these organizations have and that they can't solve themselves, not only because they're scrambling to respond to the health emergency in front of them, but also because you cannot be, as the employer, the one who's saying to people, let me monitor you, because people are not going to allow that to happen. So it's just happened very naturally. And like I said, I'm not an expert in pivoting and all these different things. I know people talk about this. We did it in a way very naturally and in a gradual way, probably slower than I would have liked now in retrospect, in the sense that I would have liked to be farther ahead the journey so that we could be already engaging in pilots and things like that. But I've also enjoyed the fact that I'm very happy to share the information in this forum and say it's real. And I am as passionate about this as the climate change and physical inactivity story that I was sharing at the beginning of my presentation, because it actually happened, and that purpose came to light very clearly as we were moving through the progression of creating this new product or entity or whatever we want to call it. Whereas when you just say, let's just pivot because we need to survive, which a lot of companies have to do, I like I said, I go back to my own personal reflection. I need to know why I'm doing it to actually be comfortable to even talk about this. And before I came on the call and started talking to you a little while ago, I was thinking about what I wanted to share and not share. And I decided that I felt really comfortable sharing this because I really believe in it now. And I think that's what makes it really be meaningful from a personal perspective.
Totally. No, totally. You've got to really believe on it, because as you said, you will need that passion, that power, that strength through the journey, because the journey usually is a hard one. So if you don't have that passion, it's short-term.
Absolutely.
Energy.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jose, for joining us today. I hope that you enjoyed the interview. Also, we have lots of messages, people that are enjoying the talk. Not really questions, but I don't know if you want to send a final message or talk about something else to close the conversation, or you're happy with it?
No, the only thing I'll say is, and I've said it already a few times, is I think there's really lots of challenges that the world is facing right now, whether it's humans in the world or the environment, and I think there's enough problems out there that, and every time I participate in conversations like this or in those co-petitions that I keep losing and all those different things. I'm obviously saying that half jokingly, but it really provides me with a boost of energy when you realize that there's a lot of smart and driven and passionate people trying to really solve all these challenges that the world is facing. So perhaps an extension of my reflection is I need to know why, but I also really enjoy having that extra boost of outside energy, which is seeing other people tackling challenges that I haven't even thought about. Or then not looking for collaboration necessarily, but just almost breathing with a sigh of relief and breathing more calmly when I know that all these other challenges that I'm not going to be able to tackle because that's not what I have expertise in, there's lots of intelligent people trying to address. So the only reflection I would invite people to make is, how can we all, in our own separate way, make a small or big contribution to the many challenges that the world is facing, and ideally then find really other passionate people to collaborate with so you can make those dreams happen. And that's perhaps the last thing I will say. And if anybody who's listening now live or watching this later wants to reach out, I don't know what the mechanism is. Lucas,
yeah, we can. What do you prefer? How can people connect with you? LinkedIn, or what's the best way to connect with you? I'm old school,
so email is the best for me. And
okay, yeah, we can share your email if you want.
Absolutely, that's the way. And my Motus Science one, and that's the way that I know I will respond to people.
Okay, so what's your email then?
So it's just Jose@motusscience.com.
That's with double S.
Yes. So the Motus and then the science. Yeah,
perfect.
Exactly.
I'll also put it in the post so people can see whenever they watch this video. If they are not
whether it's for questions, for collaboration inquiries, for criticism, anything is welcome.
Great, perfect. So yeah, as you say, everybody has to put their little or big collaboration, or at least the majority, and that's how we are going to have a better future, not only for us but also the generations that come after us. I'm safe because you said people under 30 are going to pay. I'm 31, so I'm safe, right?
So you don't have to pay the climate change debt. You're the one imposing it on the younger people.
Yeah, giving them the depth.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, Jose, many thanks for your time. I really enjoyed this interview. Really interesting topics and really important topics overall. And well, I hope that we continue collaborating. You also know that Insight is open for any type of collaboration that we could help with from our side, and me as well in a personal level. So perfect. Thank you very much, Jose, and also thank you very much to everybody that joined us in this interview. And well, have a great night.
Thank you so much, Lucas. Really appreciate it and look forward to seeing you in person soon.
Totally. Hopefully very soon. Bye.
Ciao.
Bye, everybody. Have a great night.